Hello, back for another 10 minutes of chapter 2, The Pet Forgetter Cure. So Mrs. Rolfe just dropped Rebecca off at Mrs. Pigglewiggle's farm, and here we go. All animals know when somebody loves them and is not afraid of them, and Mrs. Pigglewiggle's animals adored Rebecca immediately. She could even get right in the pen with Fanny and her piggies, which was very remarkable because Fanny was quite disagreeable and usually tried to bite anyone who came in her pen. Lester, Wag, and Lightfoot, of course, loved her and followed her all over the farm. Even Warren the gander wasn't too nasty to her and only hissed when he was a long way off. She curried Trotsky until he shone like satin, and then she led him out to the watering trough and scrubbed his hooves with soap and a stiff scrubbing brush. She gave Lester a bath with shampoo, rubbed him dry with one of Mrs. Pigglewiggle's bath towels, and put Lily of the Valley cologne behind his ears. She cleaned out all the stalls in the barn and put in fresh new straw. She cleaned out the chicken houses. She cleaned out the chicken houses and put in fresh peat moss. She made a little pen for Fanny's babies out in the orchard, turned Fanny into Lester's pen, scrubbed Fanny's pen out with hot soap and water, and covered the floor with clean, sweet-smelling sawdust. She tidied up Penelope's cage and cleaned out the rabbit hutches and the turkey pens. She was busy and helpful and happy. "I just don't know how I ran this farm without you," said Mrs. Pigglewiggle, "especially now that you have learned to milk." "I'd like to live here forever," Rebecca said. "I love farms and I love animals and I love you." Wag licked her hand. Lightfoot jumped onto her shoulder and Penelope said, "We love Rebecca. We love beautiful Rebecca." Everything was just as happy as could be for 1 week. Then came the day when Mrs. Pigglewiggle had to take Lester into the Hendricks to cure Eunice of her bad table manners. Mrs. Pigglewiggle had to leave very early because the 6:30 bus was the only one that came through Little Spring Valley. She told Rebecca that she would try to be home before dark. Rebecca said, "Don't worry, Mrs. Pigglewiggle. I'll feed the animals and milk Arbutus. Shall I turn Trotsky into the south pasture with the sheep?" "That would be fine," said Mrs. Pigglewiggle. "And don't forget Heather's calf meal. And be sure the baby chicks and ducklings and gooselings are all in before dark. You know how anxious Pulitzer, the owl, is to get his claws on them." "Oh, yes. There is a pail of sour milk in the cellar to mix with Franny's food. Well, I guess I'd better be off, or I'll miss my bus. Come, Lester." Rebecca hugged and kissed Mrs. Pigglewiggle and Lester and waved at them until her arm ached. Then she started down to the barn. She was just going to turn on the water in the watering trough when she heard a funny noise down by the oat field. It was kind of a chug, 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 like a steam engine. She strained her eyes, but she couldn't quite see because the chicken house was in the way. So she ran to the top of the hill, and a big maple tree was in the way. Finally, she ran all the way down to the oat field. Still, she couldn't see anything. So she ran through the oat field until she came to the line fence, and there just beyond, in Mr. Larson's wheat field, was a big red tractor standing still and puffing. "Hi there," called Rebecca to the tractor. "Hi," answered a voice from the back wheel. "I've lost a pin somewhere. Do you want to help me look for it?" "Sure," said Rebecca. "What kind of pin, safety or straight?" A big, tall man stood up and laughed. He said, "It's a caterpill, sort of a nail with 2 prongs on it." "Oh, I know," said Rebecca. "There's one on my bike. I fix my bike all the time." "Good for you," said the man. "My name is Nels Larson. What's yours?" "Rebecca Rolfe," said Rebecca. "I'm visiting Mrs. Pigglewiggle." "That's fine," said Nels. "She's a very nice woman. I'm going to cut her oats for her when they are ripe." "Can I help you?" asked Rebecca. "You sure can," said Nels. "Now let's look for that pin so I can finish my disking." After almost half an hour of looking, Rebecca found the pin, and as a reward, Nels let her ride on the tractor with him. At lunchtime, he took her home to his house, and Mrs. Larson gave her a hot, fresh bread, chicken and dumplings, and wild blackberry pie. She had a wonderful time, but she had forgotten all about Mrs. Pigglewiggle's animals. Arbutus was bawling in her stall, waiting to be milked and fed. Trotsky stood in his stall, whining to be fed and let out to pasture. Fanny and her piggies all squealed and grunted for their breakfast. The chickens cackled, and Egbert shrieked, "Breakfast!" at the top of his voice. Warren and Evelyn Goose and Millard and Martha Mallard brought their babies over to the watering trough for a swim, but there was no water. Rebecca had forgotten to turn it on. Lightfoot meowed and meowed in the barn door, but her saucer stayed dry. Wag barked and barked and barked, but nobody filled his water dish. Georgette, Lynette, and Paulette brought their babies up by the back porch to see why Mrs. Pigglewiggle hadn't thrown them any grain and why they didn't have any water. Heather bawled and bawled for her breakfast, and Clematis and her lambs came clear up from the south pasture to see what was the matter. Over at the Larsons, Rebecca shouted, "Giddy up, Charlie," as she guided the old white horse between the rows of potatoes. She was covered with dirt and perspiration, and her face was as red as a tomato, but she was having a wonderful time. It was almost 6 o'clock when Nels finally told her that she'd better bring Charlie in for supper. "Supper? Oh my gosh," said Rebecca. "Oh my gosh, I forgot to feed the animals, and I forgot to milk Arbutus, and I forgot to turn Trotsky into the pasture. Oh, what will I do?" "You'd better run home as fast as your legs can carry you," said Nels. "It sounds to me as if you are in trouble. Listen." Through the still evening air across the rolling green fields from Mrs. Pigglewiggle's farm came all kinds of loud cries for food. "Food," bellowed Arbutus. "Meow," cried Heather. "Oh, oh, 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 oh," whined Trotsky. "Gog, gog, grain," cackled the hens. "Water," bleated the sheep. "Milk, milk," whined Lightfoot. "Food, food, food," barked Wag. "Feed me, feed me, feed me," shrieked Penelope. "She forgot our food. She forgot our food," crowed Egbert. "Lunch, lunch, 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 lunch," grunted Fanny. "Feed me, squealed the 14 pigs. "Wee, wait, wee, wee," whistled the turkey poults. "We want to gobble, 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 gobble. We want to gobble, gobble, gobble," said Tom. Shame, said Warren Gander. Come back, called Martha and Millard Mallard. Okay, I know you guys enjoyed all those sounds from me, huh? Rebecca hung her head. "I'm so ashamed," she said. "I forgot my friends." "Well, being ashamed won't help," Nels said. "Just hurry along home and feed them." "Goodbye, Nels," Rebecca said. "It was awfully nice of you to let me ride the tractor and steer your horse." "It was a pleasure," Nels said. "Come over any time." Like a swallow, Rebecca darted through the potato patch, across the wheat field, squeezed under the barbed wire fence, tearing the right leg of her jeans, across the oat field, over the little hill, past the chicken house, and into the barn. The noise in there was deafening. Wag saw her first. He dashed down from the house, raced through the door, and ran between her legs, knocking her flat. Then, instead of licking her face in apology, he stood and growled at her. She said, "Oh, Wag, please forgive me. I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean to forget your food." Coldly, he turned away and went into Trotsky's stall. Rebecca got up, hurried into the feed room, scooped up the lard bucket of mush, and dumped it into Arbutus's feed box. She said, "I'm truly sorry, Arbutus. I'll milk you right away." Arbutus turned her head away. Then Rebecca skittered up the loft stairs and threw down oat hay until Trotsky's manger was full. Peering down the chute at him, she said, "Oh, Trotsky, please forgive me." Trotsky turned his back on her. Next, she raced up to the house and got the slops and bucket of sour milk for Fanny. There were 2 full buckets, and she had quite a time carrying them. She was panting when she got to Fanny's pen. "Here, Fanny, old girl," she said, dumping in the whole bucket of clabbered milk. "Grrr," said Fanny, snapping at her hand. "Why, Fanny, how could you?" Rebecca said, beginning to cry. "Blup, blup, blup," said Fanny, burying her snout in the milk. Rebecca poured in the other bucket, wiped her eyes on her sleeve, and went in to milk Arbutus. Arbutus's bag was swollen, and she was leaking milk all over the floor. Rebecca felt very ashamed. She was milking as fast as she could, and the milk was swishing into the bucket when she felt a sharp pain in her leg. She looked down, and Lightfoot, tail switching, eyes blazing, was standing with one paw up, ready to scratch her again. Quickly, Rebecca got up and filled Lightfoot's saucer with warm milk. She filled it 3 times before she finished milking. Heather was so hungry she slurped up half the warm milk before Rebecca could mix the calf meal with it. As soon as she had fed Heather, Rebecca strained the rest of the milk, put it to cool, gave Arbutus some hay, brought her 2 buckets of water, cleaned out her stall, and put in fresh straw. Then she went into Trotsky. As soon as she stepped into his stall, he backed up and stamped on her foot. "Ow!" she cried. "Trotsky, you're hurting me." Looking around at her disdainfully, he slowly lifted his hoof. Limping, Rebecca brought him 2 buckets of water, which he gulped down. Then she cleaned out his stall, put in fresh straw, and gave him a bucket of oats. She didn't dare go in Fanny's pen, but as the piglets were still nursing, she knew they had plenty of food. Then she hurried down to the chicken house. All the chickens had gone to bed, but she filled the mash hoppers and scattered grain around for the early risers. There were 2 hens on the nest, and when she reached under them to gather the eggs, they pecked her wrists hard. After she had taken care of the chickens, Rebecca fed the ducks and geese, the rabbits and the mother hens. Then she watered the sheep. Heavens, but she was tired and hungry. She went up to the house. Immediately Penelope shrieked at her. "Well, about time, Miss Gadding, all day. Where's supper? Where's supper? Where's supper?" "Please, dear, dear, dear Penelope, forgive me," Rebecca said. "I'll get your supper right away." She tried to open the back door, but it was locked. "What will I do, poor Penelope?" she said, rattling the doorknob. Then, on the bench by the pump, she saw the box of Parrot Crunch. "Now, you poor dear little hungry parrot," she said, dumping a capful into Penelope's feeding cup. Penelope hopped down off her perch, reached through the bars of her cage, and bit Rebecca's finger. "Ouch!" Rebecca yelled. "Serves you right, bad girl," Penelope said. So, that was a little bit over 10 minutes, sorry. It's getting crazy, huh? I wonder if Mrs. Piggle Wiggle will not be happy with Rebecca when she comes back. There's just a couple pages left, so I will finish those next time and then start chapter 3. See you later.